Questions to the Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. Max Madden.
Number 1, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today. This evening I hope to have an audience of Her Majesty the Queen.
Mr. Max Madden.
May I ask the Prime Minister a question of which I gave her office notice earlier today? Namely, will she take this opportunity to condemn Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge for the mass murder of more than 1 million innocent Cambodians? And also, will she tell the House what action she and her government are taking to stop Pol Pot and his allies marching back to power so that they can murder still more millions of innocent Cambodians?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We have repeatedly made clear our utter abhorrence for the Khmer Rouge and all it stands for. We have never given support of any kind to the Khmer Rouge. Our aim over many years has been to prevent a return to the atrocities of the Pol Pot years, and as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, we are working hard to achieve this through a comprehensive political settlement.
Mr. Jim Lester.
Would my right honourable friend agree that those of us who seek to prevent the return of the Khmer Rouge should wholeheartedly support the Supreme National Council, which has now been established, comprising of both the internal and external Khmers? We should wholeheartedly support the comprehensive political settlement, which in Annex 2 deals with the disarmament, deals with the mines, deals with the caches of weapons, and deals with the return of refugees and free elections. And would she also agree that as we, as a government, recognise now that neither the external Khmers nor the Hun Sen regime as a legitimate government, we should talk equally to both sides?
Again, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I agree with him that we should support the efforts of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, another example of the 5 permanent members working very closely together. The Supreme National Council does, of course, include Hun Sen, Sihanouk, Son San, and the Khmer Rouge. But those are the components of the Supreme National Council, and I agree with what my honourable friend said.
Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, on the exchange rate mechanism, does the Prime Minister recall, does the Prime Minister recall that on 20th September she was adamant, in her own words, that the Madrid conditions won't be changed and that they include getting inflation near to the European average? Will she tell us whatever happened in the following 2 weeks to make her completely cave in?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman will have heard what my right honourable friend the Chancellor said in his most excellent statement. There were several conditions laid out in the Madrid statement. A number of them had been fully achieved and some others were on the way. Perhaps the most important movement was free movement of capital, next progress on free trade in financial services, next progress on the single market, and further progress in competition policy. Monetary conditions here made possible a reduction of 1% in interest rates. Yes, we could have gone on further and waited until inflation has been visibly seen to become down. But so many of the conditions had been met, and there was so much speculation about when we were going into the exchange rate mechanism, we took advantage of the excellent opportunity which
Order is a very important matter. Order.
We took advantage of the excellent opportunity of monetary conditions coming within their limits to end all the speculation about when we should go in, just 1 year after we had increased the interest rates to 15% just before the Tory party conference.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is so confident about her judgment, why won't she simply come to the House next week and speak in the debate? Isn't it now obvious, Mr. Speaker, that her own personal position on this issue is utterly impossible to justify, and that she's just plain frit?
Mr. Speaker, unlike the right honourable gentleman, I have a most excellent Chancellor, an excellent Treasury team, a superb...
Order. Prime Minister.
A superb Secretary for Trade and Industry, and I shall be here answering questions every Tuesday and Thursday, and I hope one day he may know how to ask a good one.
Mr. Keith Manns.
Would my right honourable friend agree with me that a responsible policy towards the environment must be both practical and realistic, and that to insist on the reduction of CO2 emissions around the turn of the century, whilst at the same time discounting the future use of nuclear power, increasing the use of fossil fuels such as coal, and promoting cheaper petrol makes no sense whatsoever and is highly environmentally damaging as well.
I agree with my honourable friend. If one wants to get down emissions of carbon dioxide, one of the best ways is to support nuclear power. We have also seen recently a very substantial increase in the price of oil and petrol without attempting to put it up further. And I think that any promises which are made should be capable of being fulfilled. And the earliest date on carbon dioxide emissions that we can fulfill the promise is the year 2005.
James Wallace.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister not agree that the honourable and decent way forward in the tragic case of 1,200 haemophiliacs suffering from the AIDS virus would be to offer far more generous compensation than has been the case up to now, rather than continuing to fund ever-increasing fees to lawyers to argue the toss over it?
Mr. Speaker, the government has already made available some £34 million to the haemophiliacs who are suffering from this very most grievous happening, £34 million as an ex gratia payment without prejudice to them taking legal action in the courts. Obviously, we wish to know the legal position before any further payment is considered.
To Richard Alexander.
As my right honourable friend had time to notice, British Rail's 25% pay offer to its track laying and signalling staff. Would she agree with me that pay awards of this order will merely outrage fare-paying passengers, will stoke up inflation, and put off further the day when we can get interest rates yet further down?
Mr. Speaker, if my recollection on that is correct, there were certain recommendations made after the Clapham accident about signalling, which I think have to be taken into account when one judges this particular settlement. And I'm sure that my honourable friend would agree that it's absolutely vital that we live up to the safety standards required of us by the report following that terrible accident.
Maria Fife.
I refer the honourable lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Fife.
Does the honourable lady remember saying 15 months ago that lowering United Kingdom inflation in particular was the most important of the Madrid conditions? And if it's no longer so, when and why did she begin to change her mind and decide that the honourable member for Blavey was right?
Mr. Speaker, had the honourable lady listened, she would have heard both the Chancellor yesterday and myself say that a large number of the conditions had already been met. There was, in fact, an opportunity to go into the exchange rate mechanism. We took it. It was right. It has been warmly welcomed, and I'm amazed that the honourable gentlemen and ladies opposite are being so small-minded about it. Didn't they want us to go in?
Sir James Spicer.
Told you. Mr. Speaker, many honourable members of this House will know the Kuwaiti ambassador.
Yeah, you've lost your votes there in Kuwait.
But not many members of this House will know that 3 weeks ago, his brother-in-law was seized by the Iraqi forces, taken away, tortured for 16 days, and then taken back to his own home to be executed in front of his own house and his family. will my right honourable friend give this House an assurance that people who perpetrate these crimes will not escape punishment?
Mr. Speaker, we all share the revulsion of that brutal act, and we've seen the Amnesty International report of many other brutal acts conducted daily by Saddam Hussein in Kuwait, which makes it clear that we really must deal with this man. And I agree with my honourable friend that he must be made answerable for these terrible crimes, as well as withdrawing from Kuwait and the legitimate government of Kuwait restored. And I join with my honourable friend in sending our sympathies to the Kuwaiti government for this terrible brutality.
Mr. Bernie Grant.
I defer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Is the Prime Minister aware of the indignation and outrage felt by Cypriots living in my constituency about the government's two-faced attitude towards invasions, sending troops into Saudi Arabia with regards to the invasion of Kuwait, but doing absolutely nothing about the Turkish invasion of Cyprus? Is the Prime Minister...
Order! Sit down, please. Order! Order! Mr. Grant.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the international financial bandit, Mr. Asil Nadir, and his company Polypec have made their money by stealing property, orange groves and hotels from Greek Cypriots who are living in exile in my constituency? And will she do something?
Order! This House is about putting forward views which we honourable feel strongly about. Well, he's a right to do it.
And what is the Prime Minister going to do about preventing this carpetbagger, Mr. Nadir, from bringing his money out of the north of Cyprus into this country, his ill-gotten gains, in order to bail his Polypec company out?
Perhaps the honourable gentleman has forgotten that the events which led in Cyprus to the Turkish invasion and the toppling of Makarios happened during the lifetime of the Labour government. And the decision not to invoke the guarantee was that of the then Foreign Secretary, now noble Lord Callaghan. You will be fully aware that we wish to see the state of Cyprus continue bizonal, bicommunal, and fully support the efforts of Mr. Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations, to bring that about. With regard to the latter part of his question, he knows full well that these matters are under investigation by the Serious Fraud Squad.
Mr. Jonathan Aitken.
Would my right honourable friend comment on the recent press interview given by the General commanding the British forces in the Gulf, in which he said that he expected that further British troops who are still now under training would be deployed in that area? Would my right honourable friend agree that while that policy may well be welcome and right, it would be preferable if such announcements could be made in the first place to Parliament?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is aware that the Armoured Brigade is on its way there, the full Armoured Brigade. I know of no intention to send any further people. Obviously, it goes with its full support staff, including the engineers, the full hospital staff, the full support staff, which is not the 8,000 of the Armoured Brigade, but about 11,000 in all. Those are part of the support for the Armoured Brigade.
Mr. Ronnie Fern. Number 6.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Fern.
Is the Prime Minister aware that 39 countries have now ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child? When is this country going to ratify those excellent terms? What are we waiting for?
Mr. Speaker, I signed it when we were at the United Nations on behalf of the United Kingdom. To ratify it will have to come before this House.
Mr. Harry Greenway.
Mr. Speaker, sir, is my right honourable friend aware that Mr. Tony Wilbraham, a Baghdad hostage and father of my constituents Joanne and Paul, could die as soon as Christmas of advanced lung cancer? Will she do all she can to secure his early release, with his wife who's standing by him and nursing him, with other sick hostages whom President Saddam Hussein has so far not had the compassion to release.
Mr. Speaker, we have every sympathy with Mr. Wilbraham and his family and with other people who are suffering from terminal illnesses, who are so wickedly being detained by Saddam Hussein, showing just the true nature of this person. Our ambassador, as my honourable friend knows, is still in Baghdad and makes strenuous efforts to see that these people are in fact released. The total and utter condemnation belongs to Saddam Hussein for not releasing them more quickly.